When real estate agent Claire Bennett took on the old Victorian mansion at 13 Hollow Creek Road, she thought it was the deal of a lifetime. But as the sun set and the shadows grew longer, she realized the house wasn't just empty, it was waiting. Claire Bennett had seen her fair share of creepy houses. As a real estate agent specializing in historic properties, she was no stranger to creaky floorboards, dusty attics, and the occasional unsettling vibe. But 13 Hollow Creek Road was different. From the moment she stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the house, she felt a cold, unshakable presence that seemed to wrap around her like a vice. The Victorian mansion had been on the market for decades, passed over by buyers and agents alike. Its towering gables and intricate woodwork were stunning, but the stories surrounding it were enough to make even the most seasoned investor think twice. Locals whispered about the family who had lived there in the 1920s, about how they had vanished overnight, leaving behind a half-eaten meal and a house frozen in time. Claire, however, wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. To her, the house was a gold mine, a diamond in the rough just waiting for the right buyer. And if that meant spending a few nights there to stage it properly, so be it. But as the first night fell, Claire began to question her skepticism. The house seemed to come alive in the dark. Shadows moved where there was no light, whispers echoed through empty halls, and the temperature dropped so low she could see her breath. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Every corner, every doorway, every reflection in the dusty mirrors seemed to hold eyes that weren't hers. By the second night, Claire was no longer alone. The family who had vanished so long ago began to make their presence known. A child's laughter echoed from the nursery, a woman's sobs drifted down the staircase, and the sound of a man's heavy footsteps paced the halls. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had no intention of letting Claire leave. As the days turned into weeks, Claire's grip on reality began to slip. The house was changing her, twisting her thoughts and memories until she could no longer tell where she ended and it began. She stopped answering her phone, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The only thing she cared about was the house, her house. When a curious buyer finally arrived to tour the property, they found Claire sitting in the parlor, her eyes hollow and her smile too wide. She spoke of the house as if it were a living thing, as if it were her family. The buyer left in a hurry, but Claire didn't seem to notice. She was too busy listening to the whispers, to the voices that promised she would never be alone again. 13 Hollow Creek Road never sold. To this day, it sits abandoned, its windows dark, and its halls silent. But if you pass by on a quiet night, you might see a flicker of light in the upstairs window or hear the faint sound of a woman's voice inviting you inside. After all, the house is always looking for new occupants. Claire's descent into madness was not immediate, nor was it subtle. It started with the whispers. At first, they were faint, indistinct murmurs that she could almost dismiss as the wind rustling through the ancient wooden beams. But soon they grew clearer, calling her name, telling her secrets that no one else could know. One evening, as she sat in the dim glow of a flickering candle, she heard it, the unmistakable giggle of a child. She turned toward the staircase, her pulse quickening. At the top of the stairs stood a little girl in a pale blue dress, her dark eyes wide and unblinking. Claire's breath hitched. She knew, deep in her bones, that this was one of the vanished children. But instead of fear, she felt an odd sense of belonging. The child extended a hand, and Claire, against all reason, reached for it. The moment their fingers touched, the house shifted. The walls pulsed like a living thing, the floor groaned beneath her, and suddenly, Claire was no longer standing in the present. The wallpaper was pristine, the chandeliers gleamed, and the scent of fresh bread wafted through the air. The house was alive, thriving. Claire wandered through the halls, mesmerized. The family was here. The mother stood at the stove, humming a tune, while the father sat in his chair, reading the evening paper. It was as if time had rewound. But something was off. Their eyes never met hers. Their movements were too stiff, too mechanical. And then, as suddenly as it began, the illusion shattered. The walls darkened, the air grew thick with decay, and Claire found herself alone once more, standing in the middle of the grand hallway, the laughter of children echoing all around her. She should have run. She should have left that night. But the house had her now, and it was never going to let her go. Days blurred together. Claire no longer recognized her own reflection. Her once vibrant face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, her lips dry and cracked. The house fed on her energy, her soul. And the more she gave in, the more it rewarded her with its twisted visions. One evening, she found herself drawn to the cellar. The door had always been locked before, but now it creaked open effortlessly at her touch. The air inside was thick and suffocating, and as she descended the crumbling stairs, she saw them, figures, dozens of them, their hollow eyes staring. The lost souls of 13 Hollow Creek Road. They whispered in unison, their voices crawling under her skin like insects. Join us, Claire. Stay forever. Her scream never left her lips. No one knows what truly happened to Claire Bennett. Months later, when another agent was sent to check on the property, they found the house empty. No sign of Claire, no belongings, no trace that she had ever been there. But the house remained. And sometimes on stormy nights, if you stand outside and listen closely, you might hear the sound of a woman's voice whispering, calling, pleading. And if you dare to step inside, don't be surprised if the door's locked behind you. After all, the house is always looking for new occupants.